classic car on a forklift has to be every health and safety officer's worst nightmare, and it turns out it pretty much was. It's coming up, but first I need to say a massive shout out to our new sponsor, the guys at Delta Auto Body. And you know, Gar, Sai, Dean and Roger have already been incredible in terms of our auto body apprenticeship, and now they've given us a space somewhere clean and dry to restore the Esprit, which is such a fundamental thing, and that is something I've learned having tried to do it outside over the summer. So guys, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the coming weeks and months. Things are going to get really interesting. Now, our welder campaign set up by patron Aaron Judd, that is over halfway to its target figure, and I am now planning to hit up a welding outfitter to see if we can stretch our budget as much as possible and try and get a TIG plant, or a plant that will do MIG and TIG. Then we can really start exploring the welding thing, and I'd be very excited about that. There is a link in the description if you'd like to contribute to that, and if not, that's cool too. Now, you didn't think you were getting your dessert before you've eaten your greens, did you? We have a windscreen to put into the Cortina. Before we show you that, please like, and if you think of someone who would like to watch Soup, share it with them too. Here's the Cortina. All right, this was the bit I was dreading, because I've never done this before, and any time that I've ever played with a windscreen, I was taking it out, and my success rate, well, is 0%. So the way I've seen this done, granted it was on mini windscreens, which are a different kettle of fish, was placing the rubber onto the car and then sitting the windscreen onto that and teasing the rubber out over the windscreen. Now, what I hadn't accounted for was this windscreen has quite a curve on it, but what I've come to realize is if you're doing a windscreen with sharp corners, like almost 90-degree corners on it, rather than rounded ends, this way is just not going to work for you, because it would take so much pressure to squeeze the rubber out over the corners of the windscreen that you'd break the screen. You would just put too much flex on the screen. And this was a real killer for me, because as you can see, I got the rubber round 3/4 of the windscreen. I literally had the top and the bottom and one side done, but the third side, I mean, I could feel the tension on the glass and I wasn't going to force it any. So then I decided that the old string method was going to have to be the way. And I fitted the rubber to the screen and then got some of this baling twine and fed it into the rubber all the way around, making sure that it met at both ends. Now, I figured the best way of keeping this wet, because you've got to keep some soapy water on this at all times to make it work well, was to pour some of the water into the rubber before I even moved the screen so that the baling twine would soak it up. And that seemed to work really well. So I placed the glass on the car. I had taped up the twine just to make sure it didn't fall out, and then, as I'd seen other people do, I just started to pull on the twine. And I gotta tell you, this looks easy when you see someone else doing it, but it wasn't working for me. And after numerous attempts by myself, I brought in Sai just to lean on the windscreen from the outside so that the rubber wanted to come over the lip of the windscreen surround, and that worked. Now, this string thing, it definitely works. But when you get to the corners and you try that method that everyone seems to do, where you kind of spin the baling twine, you kind of go around in a circular motion to get it to come around the corner, well, that was not happening on this car. And looking around the workshop in desperation, I found that the guys had a very cool set of picks. And I gotta tell you that these are the things, if I was going to recommend any one thing for somebody looking to put their windscreen into the car, I would say get a set of these picks. I don't think they're expensive. These are the ones I used, and they worked a charm. And even with these, it was incredibly difficult. There was quite a lot of force required to pull that rubber in around the windscreen surround. And yeah, I've seen people do windscreens with just the twine, but I haven't seen someone do a Mark V Cortina windscreen, and I would be very surprised, certainly to see a person alone do one of these windscreens with nothing but the string. But then, who am I to judge? So I went round the whole screen like that, and it went in pretty much without problem. And the last thing to do was to fit the little chrome fillet into the exterior of the rubber. This is a finishing strip, and it kind of locks the screen in place. And again, you see these done with the tools, the special tool that you put the trim through and then run it along the windscreen rubber. Well, I found that this one was doable very easily by hand with just a little bit of a wiggle. Okay, there were a few bits that the pick came in handy, but later on I developed a method that didn't need the pick, just by kind of pushing up and down on the trim strip as I was feeding it into the channel of the rubber. And I succeeded in fitting my first windscreen. So there was just one little piece of work left to do on the Cortina to finish up, and that was the last repairs on the sill. I cut the last pieces of rust out, and then I went looking for some new metal to let in, which I hadn't brought with me. And one of the guys we haven't met yet, Roger, handed me this piece right here, and as I walked away with it, he called after me, "Hey, by the way, I took that from a 911 I was restoring." So as we look on, Tina is becoming part Porsche. Now this doggy's got some bite. So with that welded in, and by the way, I used the guy's real MIG welder, and like you've been telling me, it was a revelation. I turned my attention back to the original repair, and I ground back the welds and then trimmed off the excess metal from the lip that holds the door rubber. And the sill is looking very healthy. Now you can see here I've feathered the paint back already, and before I hit it with some filler, there was just one other little piece of rust that had started to develop at the base of the B-pillar, so I took care of that too. And something very cool happened here. I achieved the rest of this repair with just the one skim of filler. Now that's largely because this is a flat panel, more or less, but also because I've got that little bit of experience now, and I was able to apply the filler far more methodically, so it was a decent enough job. Let's not pat ourselves in the back any harder than that. So here it is, all masked up and ready for its etch and primer phases. And you can just see here in the corner, I've got one of these little folded pieces of masking tape so that we get a nice feathered edge on the primer. Now I won't labour this, I sanded back the primer, and you can see there's some bare metal sticking through. And as ever, all of this papering and masking up, this is to keep the dust down, to keep the dust out of the interior as much as possible, but also importantly to keep the dust down generally outside the car, so that when we are spraying, we're not spraying dust into the paintwork. But given it was getting late again in an evening, Dean took over some of the masking, and we're going to hit this with the black paint of the undersill first. So that's what he's masking for. And look, I don't need to say it again, but you've got to mask and then remask and then remask again, because this is the way of doing a conscientious job and giving yourself the very best chance. Now I got another slap on the wrist here, because when we shot the black, it reacted with something that I hadn't prepared properly towards the rear of this section of sill, so we had to put it all the way back and do it again. But it is a much nicer job, and this is starting to look very smart. So into the booth went Tina, and Dean started prepping her for the colour phase of the paint. And you'll see again here, he's taping back all of this plastic to make sure we've got nothing flapping around. We're going to have the best chance of creating a nice paint job here without any surprises. And here's the sill shot back over so that those bare metal pieces again have been taken care of. And with all that done, he shoots the first layer of colour. And this is very thin initially, but after drawing some air across it with the air gun to help it dry quicker, he gives it 2 more coats of colour. And actually in these shots you can see just how much force the spray gun has. You can see all the plastic moving around, even though he's gone out of his way to make sure it's as tight as he can get it. Here's a quick check with the daylight torch, and the sill is looking great. So it's time to shoot some lacquer coats, and Dean hit this with multiple lacquer coats. It is a sill after all, and he wanted to build up the lacquer nice and thick. Now things get fairly hairy when the lacquer starts being shot around in the spray booth, so I left him at it. And with the lacquer laid down, we turned the heat up on the oven and left Tina to bake. Next morning, look at this finish. This is just gorgeous. And again, there's been no prep post the spraying here. This is how it came out of the oven. nice and smooth. Is it the best job ever in the world? No, it's not. That's all down to me. But I gotta tell you, I was not prepared for how profoundly good it was to open the door of this car and not see a big gaping hole of rust. And with that, our impromptu apprenticeship at Delta Auto Body came to an end. And the last thing I did before rolling Tina out of the body shop for good was give her a good dust out with the air gun. And we were on our way. But that, as we know, is not the end of the story. And in the last episode, you caught a glimpse of the mezzanine level at Delta Auto Body, and this is the space we get to work in. Now, it took quite a bit of work to get the floor relatively clear, but then there was this big pile of crashed bumpers, so the only thing for it was to make a feature out of them. And I've created this bumper wall backdrop by stringing them together and hanging them from the ceiling. And it's a bit rough and ready, but hey, it kills two birds with one stone. It makes an interesting background and it gets them off the floor. So I felt good about recycling them. What I didn't feel good about was having to go and clean literally every one of them. But there you go, it was a labour of love. And if we swing to the right, we see the gate that the Esprit is going to have to come through. And so it was, I was able to ring our intrepid recovery guy Keith, and down he came with his flatbed and made short work of loading the Esprit. And he was full of tricks as usual. He had this block in his line. That means he doesn't have to steer a car onto the flatbed. He can anchor his towing hitch off the side of the truck to drag a car in any direction he needs to, which I thought was pretty cool. Always easy when you know how. And there are a few things in particular I love about this car. One is the amount of tyre on the rear rims and the depth of the rear rims themselves. It is just something so cool about it. Anyway, onto the motorway, and I got some cool shots as we tussle between the lanes. But nothing's faster than the Esprit, so you know, obviously I lost. And then began the saga, because I had lined up a forklift the week before. But wouldn't you know it, the guy who said he'd do it for me wasn't around. So I had a mad scurry around to try and find somebody who was willing to lift a stripped out Lotus Esprit onto a first floor mezzanine level. And I found Martin, and Martin brought along a 4-ton forklift. And we gave a tentative go at lifting the Esprit, but it was lifting only from the back and the front didn't want to come off the floor. And we didn't force it because delicate car. And the guys in the unit across the way said, hey, we've got some longer tines for that forklift. Come over and we'll sort you out. Turns out their tines wouldn't fit. Martin said, hang on, I've got some as well. And he disappeared off around the corner. And I wasn't sure I was going to see him again. But in the meantime, the lads grabbed a couple of better pallets because the one I had chosen wasn't great. We slid them under the car and then we lifted it just about 1.5 feet, 2 foot off the ground to test the waters. And it seemed stable enough. The blue rope I tied around it was more of a throwaway thing. I don't think it would have done anything. It was certainly not in the right place. I should have put it much further back. And while Dean spotted from halfway up the stairs for Martin, Gar got a second camera angle and I was able to go up onto the mezzanine level and get some shots from there. And I think I'll just let this run. The sights and sound of it probably tell the story better than I could. This only took a few minutes, but my God, they were adrenaline-packed minutes. and it felt like there should have been some kind of a fanfare as the front wheels touched down on the floor. But I ran round to the back of the car to get a shot of Martin pulling the forklift out from underneath it, and in this shot I'm using my foot like a chock under the back wheel of the Esprit, just in case it caught on the forklift and started to roll back, and that's my excuse for not quite getting the focus right. Martin is shouting, "I'll be back for when you want to pull back down again." And that poses a little bit of a logistical problem, because do we want to put the Esprit back together in its entirety and then lift it down? I don't think so. This was hairy enough with a stripped car. Anyway, the guys went back to work and I had a bit of quiet time with the Esprit to get it into position. But I had one of those moments, you know, where you just stop and take it in. And as I looked at the Esprit, I felt like I'd forgotten how cool it is. And I am stoked to get working on this car. We're already way over time on this one, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I want to thank the guys at Cawley Kitchen and Furniture, Martin and Eugene, who were just very cool and accommodating about sending around a forklift and just getting the Esprit onto the mezzanine level. Gents, you're legends, thank you so much. To the guys across the way at Masonry Fixings, who tried their best with the tines of the forklift and who gave us a big bag of tech screws that I used to build the bumper wall. And of course to the boys at Delta Auto Body for their hands-on, good-natured, easygoing approach. I am very excited about what's going to happen with the Esprit. And there will be Esprit in the next episode, there will be restoration. So turn on notifications and stay tuned. Now lastly, to my patrons, to Matt Slimmer, Gary MacDonald, John Phelan and Daniel and Jacqueline, Lawrence Sansbury, and to all my patrons, thank you for keeping this going. I will see you very shortly, and until then, good luck.